In this video, I will discuss some of the elements in fiction, and these will help you better understand the short story that you're going to read for the literary analysis assignment, which is essay number 2. Did you know that short stories, novels, poems, and other pieces of literature are like equations? Each separate part has specific meaning, and all of these separate parts tie together to form one unified whole. You always want to start with the title of a text. So in this case, we are going to be reading a short story. The title has considerable power to attract our attention, and titles help us understand what a novel or a short story or whatever we're reading is about. Titles can be the names of central characters. They can suggest mystery. They can promise a certain kind of setting or atmosphere. They can be symbolic or metaphorical. They can be offbeat or whimsical, and they can be ironic. Let's take a minute to think about the title of the short story you will be reading, The Paper Menagerie. What does this title suggest about the story? First, you need to ask, what is a menagerie? And then more specifically, what is a paper menagerie? So you want to think about that before you actually start reading the story. And as you go through the story, think about how the paper menagerie in the story help you to better understand the story's theme. And in a minute, we'll talk about theme in terms of literature. We're going to start with talking about setting as our first element in fiction, and setting describes the location of the novel, short story, or poem. Setting does not just describe a place, however. Often setting expresses a mirror or mirrors a central character's behaviors or emotional state of mind. Settings can shift to reflect changes in the plot or in a character's mood, and settings can also shift in time, moving from past to present to future. Here's an example of setting from The Paper Menagerie. The catalog said that she was 18, loved to dance, and spoke good English because she was from Hong Kong. None of these facts turned out to be true. So as you read the story and you come across this example, think about what this is telling you specifically. How does the setting tie in more specifically with the overall meaning or point of the story? Because everything in the story is related and helps the reader come to a certain conclusion about the story's point or theme. Next, we're going to talk about plot, which is the sequence of events or incidents that tell the story. All plots must have at least one type of conflict. Conflict is a clash of actions, ideas, desires, or wills. So there are different types of conflicts. Person against person, person against the environment. This could be an external force, physical nature, society, or the idea of fate. And person against herself or himself, a conflict with some element in his or her own nature. It could be physical, mental, emotional, or moral. Plots also illustrate artistic unity, which means that there is nothing irrelevant that does not contribute to the total meaning of the story. So nothing is in the story for its own sake or its own excitement. Everything is directly tied to making that larger point or theme more obvious to the reader. Plots also have different story endings. In a happy ending, this is the stereotypical expectation that the protagonist must solve all the problems, defeat the villain, win the girl, and live happily ever after. Unfortunately, in many real-life situations, we have unhappy endings, and for the writers of serious fiction, an unhappy ending sometimes is more likely to raise significant issues concerning life and living. We're going to move on now to character. When you think about characterization, firstly consider that a character's name has significance. The name can provide information about the character or a person's personality. Names can be symbolic. Also, the absence of a name is important too. In The Paper Menagerie, The story is told by Jack, and the neighbors respond to his name by saying, "That doesn't sound very Chinesey." This comment in context to Jack's name is important as you read the story. So think about what this means and how it ties to the theme of the story as you're reading. A character or a person's physical description also helps reveal important information, sometimes. So sometimes a physical description can help us identify what type of person a character truly is. And also, authors present characters in different ways. Direct presentation is when the author literally tells us what a character is like via a narrator, another character, or by the character, him or herself. Indirect presentation is when the author makes the reader induce for themselves what characters are like through the character's thoughts, actions, speech, looks, interaction with other characters, and so forth. These characters are also called dramatized characters, and they are generally consistent in behavior, they're motivated or convincing, and plausible or lifelike. Authors also use different character types. A flat character is known by one or two traits. A round character is complex and many-sided. A stock character is a stereotype, so a mad scientist, for example, an absent-minded professor, a cruel mother-in-law. A static character remains the same from beginning to end, so there's no change with the character. And a dynamic character is a developing character. They undergo permanent change over the course of the story. This change must be within the possibilities of the character, sufficiently motivated, and allow sufficient time for the change. So the most important character in any story is a dynamic character because they are actually going to undergo some kind of change over the course of the story, and that change is important. That change usually ties in with the theme of the story. Two terms you should be familiar with in terms of characterization include protagonist and antagonist. The protagonist is the central character, and they can be sympathetic or unsympathetic. So not necessarily the quote-unquote good person in the story. The protagonist does not have to be a good person. So whichever character actually gets the most attention in the story is the protagonist. The forces working against her or him, whether persons, things, conventions of society, or traits of their own character, are the antagonists. So the protagonist is a central character, whereas the antagonist is anything working against that character to bring them down. We're going to move on to theme. In literature, theme refers to the controlling idea or central insight of a story. It can be a revelation of human character, and it can also be stated briefly or at great length. But we don't want to confuse the theme with the moral of the story. A theme does not necessarily have to have any morality tied to it. A theme must be expressible in the form of a statement. So for example, you wouldn't say war, but put that into a statement. War is pointless and a curse on humanity. So we have to have some kind of statement made about a topic for an effective theme to occur. A theme must be stated as a generalization about life. So you want to leave out specific information such as characters' names or specific situations and make the statement more general. But a theme must not be a generalization larger than is justified by the terms of the story. So whatever you say the theme is for a story, you have to be able to find specific evidence within the story to support that theme. You can't rely on any supposed information. So, continuing that thought, a theme must account for all the major details in the story. It must not be contradicted by any detail of the story, and it must not rely, again, on supposed facts. These are facts not actually stated or clearly implied by the story. And there's no one magical way to state a theme. The same idea should apply, but the way the specific words used to state a theme will be different from person to person. Any statement that reduces a theme to some familiar saying, like an aphorism or a cliche, should be avoided. Some examples include "a stitch in time saves 9," "you can't judge a book by its cover," and "fish and guests smell in 3 days." These are so overused that they really don't have much meaning anymore. You want to dig deeper and put some real time and thought into writing a theme for a story. Next, we're going to talk about point of view. And the way an author tells a story is called the point of view. Authors use different points of views to tell stories. I'm not going to go over all of them in detail, but we will talk a little bit in general about first person. This is where the author identifies with or disappears in a major or minor character, so they are actually characters within the story. The story is told using the first person I and other first person pronouns. And there are different techniques within the first person narrative that I'm not going to talk about in detail, but just to know that there are different techniques within the first person voice. With second person, this is actually a rare voice in literature. It's where the narrator refers to one of the characters as you. So we don't see that often. The most point of view in literature is the third person point of view. Each and every character is referred to by the narrator as he, she, it, or they. The narrator is not a character in the story. The narrator is an unspecified entity or uninvolved person that conveys the story. And many literary texts use an alternating person, which means that the point of view alternates between the first and the third person. And then there is also an epistolary novel, which is used or written using a series of letters and other documents. We're not going to see an example of this with our short story, but just to let you know, this does exist. That concludes this presentation. Thank you.